Okay, so we're now on to lesson 3 of module 1, and we're looking today at properties of integers. Integers are whole numbers, okay? Now it's quite a short one, and it's once again just making sure you've got those foundations in place before we proceed, before we build on them, making sure they're solid foundations so that there's not going to be any gaps, anything that you don't understand moving forward. So multiples. Multiples, think of the words multiply if we're getting bigger, multiplying if we're doing a times table of a number. So multiples, simply put, are the numbers that are in a times table of a number. So the multiples of 11 would be 11, 22, 33, 44, etc., because they are the numbers in its times table. Often, rather than just finding a multiple, you are asked to find the lowest common multiple of two numbers, of two integers. So, and you simply write out the times table of those numbers and find the first one, the lowest number that they have in common. So this example, what is the lowest common multiple of 12 and 8? Write out the 12 times table, write out the 8 times table, and find the first one that they've got in common. So this example here, 24 would be the lowest common multiple. Now that's not the only multiple they have in common. If we continued, we would get to 48, and 48 would also be in both of them, okay? But it's in the name, it's the lowest one that they've got in common. Oh, typo there, lowest common multiple of 12 and 8. Okay, right, let's move on. So that's not to be confused with a factor. So to find factors of a number, find numbers that multiply together to make that number, starting with 1 multiplied by the number, then 2 times the number, 3 times the number, and etc. And you keep going till you find a number that repeats. Now I'm just going to give you an example of that. If we were finding the factors of, let's just leave a little gap here so I can just go over what I mean. Just get the pen tool. Right, so if we were finding the factors of 20, for example, okay, so you start by doing 1 times that number. So 1 multiplied by 20 is 20. 2 times by 10 is 20. So I've said start with 1 times the number, 2 times the number, 3 times the number. You can't do because 3 times isn't in 20 isn't in the 3 times table. 4 is, however, 4 times 5 is. And then we would obviously, the next after 4 would be 5. However, we've already done 4 times 5 and 5 times 4 is the same. So that is when you stop. So always move down in this logical order, starting with the 1. So the factors of 20 then would be 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. Okay, so they're whole integers that go into the number 20. Okay, right, so that's how you find out what the factor of numbers are. Just going to clean that up and go back up. Then notes that you could write on there if you have printed that out. It's another thing that we'll go over when we do the live lesson. So all the factors of 12 and 15, I've done 12 and 15 because then we're going to go on to find the highest common factor, okay? So factors of 12 and 15, so I've done the 1 times 12 is 12, 2 times 6 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. Obviously, this is all of them because it would then be repeated. We'd then go on to 4 times the number, which would be 4 times 3 is repeated. Same for 15, okay? 2 times doesn't go, so we can't include that, and 4 times doesn't go. I've simply then listed out the factors of 12 and 15. So it's always the lowest common multiple, but it's the highest common factor. So they want the highest number that they've got in common. So you would go along your list here. So they don't share 12 and 15 or 6 and 5 or 4, but they do share the number 3. That's the highest factor they have in common. So the highest common factor of 12 and 15 would be 3. Okay. Now, there are other ways of doing that using prime factor decomposition and Venn diagrams, which is something that you may have gone over in school, and it's definitely something that we're going to be covering, but not in this foundation aspect. This is just one, not in these foundation module 1. So this is just one way of doing it, okay? Potentially the simplest way. Okay, this leads nicely on to prime numbers, because prime numbers are all to do with how many factors a number has. Prime numbers have exactly two factors, one and itself. So what I mean by that is when you're breaking the number down, you can only obtain that number by doing 1 times that number. So consider the number 1. The only way of getting 1 is by doing 1 times 1, okay? That's only one factor. 1 is a repeated factor, but it still only has one factor, which is the number 1. Therefore, it's not prime, because as I said at the beginning, they have to have exactly 2 factors, okay? So 2, you get 2. The only way is by doing 1 times 2. So that has 2 factors, therefore it's prime. 3, the only way of getting 3 is doing 1 times 3. That has 2 factors, 1 and 3. So it's also a prime number. 4, however, you can obtain by doing 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. So it's got 3 factors, the 1, 2, and the 4. Therefore, it's not prime. So all the prime numbers that we go through only have those 2 factors. So 7 is another example. 1 times 7 is 7. There's no other way of obtaining 7. Interestingly, the only even prime number is 2. And they often ask that in a question. They'll often say, it's often a statement that someone says. For example, Sam says that all prime numbers are odd. Is he correct? Okay, no, he's not. 2 is an even prime number, but that is the only prime number. Right, as I said, that was a really short module, really short lesson within the module, I should say. But once again, some really key things that you need to know. You need to know to move forward. Okay, so we'll end that one there.